Welcome to our webinar Wednesday series. We've been pretty consistent with this for the last several months. I had some very good attendance and participation from those of you that have signed up. Covered a lot of different topics. Any topics that you may have been interested in, may have missed, you can go back to our website and you can see recorded versions, as these are all being recorded, so you can reference them at a later time. One thing we'll mention is just a little bit of housekeeping as far as how we'll work today. Down at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box. So as you have questions throughout Philip's presentation, go ahead and type them in at that time or type them in later. At the end of his presentation, then I will go through some of those questions. We'll try to get all of them answered. Some I will summarize with some other similar type of questions, but we'll try and get all of them answered live if we can. If we don't get to your specific question, then we can get to those afterwards with a direct email to you, as we have a list of the questions that will be answered. But we'll try and get them all, so type them in as you think about it, and then I'll have them in queue here, and we can get to them when we're done. When we are finished with this, you will all receive a email that will have a link to this recorded session and presentation that you can then watch it afterward if you missed part of it today or want to share it with other colleagues. So you will get that email with a link to this presentation. And as all of our presentations, you would always get that as well. This month also happens to be Aviagen's Turkey Month. And they wrote a very nice article about the turkeys, and they're kind of focusing on the turkeys this month. And that will be a link to that article will be provided in that email you'll get afterwards, along with the link to this presentation. So this presentation by Philip kind of coincides with that nicely. With that, the presentation today is going to be specifically for turkey producers. There'll be a lot of information in there, I'm sure, that'll help a lot of other people in hatcheries in general. We're trying to focus on the turkeys and the turkey production. Philip's had many years in the working in the turkey industry, over 20 years, I believe, working in hatcheries, specifically with turkeys as manager and other areas in the hatchery. So a lot of experience over the years. And so he'll be able to answer all your questions. So think of some good ones and let's challenge Philip with this. So with that, we'll go ahead and let Philip take over, and I'll stay tuned here, and we'll pop back in and see you all at the conclusion of this presentation and entertain any questions. So thank you much. And Philip, go ahead.
All right. Well, let's get this screen set up for everyone. And I'm happy to be here and excited to be talking turkey incubation with Jamesway. I think this is one of the presentations of the webinars I have been doing that I've actually been excited about. I have a heart for turkey incubation. It's where I got my start in my career, and I've always enjoyed it. I remember my first time walked in a hatchery in Harrisonburg, and a gentleman took a candling light and shined it on the embryo, turkey embryo at about 10 days. And that thing was just jumping around inside that egg, and it hooked me. And I've been hatching ever since, really enjoyed it. And so with that, we'll kind of go on and take it from here. It's nice to see a lot of names out there I recognize, and don't be too rough on me toward the end, but we'll keep going here. So let's see if we can get the presentation. Okay, so first thing I just want to a few things want to cover is changes over the years that we've seen in the turkey hatchery. One, of course, everybody's aware is biosecurity. Now we put on hairnets, maybe change clothes if we're going in. We even have, in some of our more secure hatcheries, we shower in. So a lot of changes that we've seen in this area alone. How about animal welfare? We now, so much of our hatchery manager's job now is just documentation. Has this employee been trained on how to properly place a poult in a box? I mean, there's so many changes now that we just have to be conscientious of. It's just not going in and pulling a hatch, servicing, and putting out the door. And with that, servicing has changed. And I was just in a hatchery a couple of weeks ago. Now I see we have some automated spur clipping or dew claw removal, which is going to really help us there. But we no longer we used to use scissors for toe trimming. We even have to change how we what we call the servicing that we do. We used to be toe cut, and now it's gone to just trimming or conditioning, different words like that. But all of these things I think has impacted the management of the hatchery to where they're not so much spending time out with their machines because number one, they don't have time, but it just requires a lot more human resources on the hatchery manager's part. Another big change over the years is the technology. We've gone from multi-stage to single stage. All of our room control now has gone to digital readout. We can sit at our desk, see how our rooms are running and things like that. So a lot of things with technology, when we have a bad hatch, people will, our higher management expect us to have the answers immediately because we have all the data in front of us. And so it really puts a lot, we would think technology would make our lives easier. I think sometimes when you look at it, it makes it a little bit more complicated if we allow it to. But anyway, another change over the years, some of you all may remember this feller, but I had more hair and I weighed a little less back then. I guess this is probably 25, 30 years ago. So there's been a lot of changes over the years, and I'm sure a lot of you all that have hung in the industry can relate to this picture here. So today we're just going to take a look at the Jamesway cells, multi-stage versus single stage, and we just went back about 10 years here and pulled up some data. And as you can see, this chart shows the distribution of Jamesway cells from 2011, shows the poultry industry. This would be for chicken, turkeys, and ducks, and this trend to single stage incubation. You can see that we went got pretty high, 2017, almost up to 90% of our cells were single stage. And of course, in 2018, 2019, we still have some larger hatcheries that just are used to the multi-stage, wanted to stay with that. But anyway, this is the industry's trend toward single stage incubation. And here's the turkey industry trend toward single stage. So Jamesway's not sold a turkey multi-stage incubator since introduction of the ACI in 1992. The turkey industry chose this path for its incubation future, saw the benefits of it, and I've really jumped on board anytime machines are replaced. It's always with single stage. So, really need to commend our industry for going forward with this, with the single stage concept. Some of Jamesway's first single stage machine was the, what we call the first generation ACI. Again, 1992-93. This was my first introduction to Jamesway equipment, and you had a centric controller that controlled all your machines. Wondering if anyone out there knows what ACI stands for. The term was Advanced Concepts in Incubation. So it had a first to introduce a removable ECU, environmental control unit. It could be serviced without taking equipment out of production, and all of the machines were networked to the Sentry panel. So and then in 2003, about every 10 years, Jamesway will try to foresee the future. We do the updates and try to come out with new equipment. But this had a touchpad display on each unit. A lot of these, well, the ACIs are still in production, and of course, Our Platinum 1 series are still in production, performing well. The control services were brought to the front panel. Let me take a second here. I'll get my pointer going. So all the controls were moved off the roof, which were on top of the ACI. Everything was brought down to the front panel. And again, controls are all serviced from the front panel, except for damper motors. And then we started with this touch screen on each machine. Our third generation, which we call the Platinum 2.0, most people at Jamesway recognize it as a 24 VAC series, was introduced in 2013. This had a larger 10-inch touchscreen and better resolution. We had the center console has 2 doors now, so when you open it up, you didn't have to open up that big panel to get access either to the controls or to our solenoids. In the bottom, we introduced kick plates and optional windows. We had these machines have a tighter gasket and floor sweep, and just an overall tighter cabinet. And so it made incubation a little different from the ACI going into from the first generation, the Platinum 2.0, and then going to the Platinum 1 to this series. So it's a lot tighter cabinet, so it changes things a little bit for us. It does have a energy savings. These come out 380, 460 volt, and 3-phase. So a lot of options here with our third generation Platinum, which brings us to today, which is our fourth generation Platinum. It's can be referred to as a 2.1, or we normally refer to it as our 24 volt VDC series, and this was introduced in 2018. And so if you have been expanding your hatchery and you're a company that just gets you know, a few machines at a time, you may start collecting quite an inventory of parts and things to keep up with. But these are some of our newer machines. This has a larger touch, again, another larger touchscreen. I think this one is up to 14 inches. There's no dip switches with this machine. The room machine number and the options are all done via the touchscreen. There's the run diagnostics button. It'll display the active faults immediately. And then the 2.1 has a lot of plug and play components, like our sensors. We don't have to run wire all the way back to the front panel. We can just, it just has a plug on top. If we have a bad sensor, we can replace it. Our solenoids are replaceable that way. So just a lot of more modern type things that make this machine very efficient if it does have a breakdown to get it working properly. I just want to say that, you know, I know we probably have some multi-stage customers here. I know we do. And, you know, I know that it still performs well, our multi-stage turkey machines. A lot of you have gone to, because the hatcher cabinets have just, are just falling apart, a lot of you have gone to Platinum machines and they work very well with it. But today I'm going to focus mainly on the single stage incubation of turkeys. And part of that reason is the trend we saw where the industry has gone to single stage. But you know, I don't want you all to feel left out. I'm sure you'll glean information here, and you know, we're always here to provide support and help for our multi-stage machines that are still in use out there. But here's some of the capacities. Most of you all are probably familiar with the P40, which is a 24,960 with a 30 egg Super J flat. And then the larger machine, the P60, is a very common machine. But we do have some smaller machines. I wish when I was hatching pedigree, these machines would have been available, but gives a, you know, smaller capacity. I think that P10 would be a great machine to just have for surplus eggs, extra eggs that don't meet the set that you can't fit in. The P10, you can also hatch out of this machine. So it's designed to incubate and hatch. Some options there. But anyway, some great configurations there to meet your needs and your set needs. The hatcher capacities, again, so a P60 would go into two P30s. Usually our P40 incubator will go into two P20 hatchers, and the P40, you can take a P40 incubator and transfer into a P40 hatcher and go 1-to-1. It is difficult to hatch within a P40 incubator. I know some of you all may have had instances where you've had a hatchery go down and you've had to push eggs back into a hatcher. It'll do the job, but it's not very efficient, pretty messy to hatch within some of these other machines. So that's why you know, you need the hatcher to go along with it. So starting with incubation, so it starts with 4 basic requirements, regardless of the system, regardless single stage, multi-stage, regardless of other types of equipment. There's 4 basic things. The first being electricity. It's a very thing that needs to be, we need to have conditioned electricity, constant supply. If you have a lot of calibration requirements to your equipment, a lot of times you'll find you have unstable electricity coming in. So it's a very high requirement. The next is water. We have water now has a couple of options with whether we use water to heat with, to cool with, but there's some criteria that the manuals say, you know, what the water temperature should be. And then also if you're using humidification, we have, you know, certain minimum 65 PSI to deliver nice atomized droplets within the cabinet. Another is part of basic requirement is the compressed air for turning. So we need to have good, clean air for that. We don't want to oil the line, but we want dry air. So we need to keep that air constant. We need to have plenty of air when machines turn to complete the turning process. And the fourth, and probably one of the main inputs, I think, is ventilation. You know, it is each machine has requirements for ventilation, and you'll find these in our operation manuals of what the ventilation needs are, our room ventilation or plenum ventilation, temperature, and also our humidification within those rooms. So with all of these, our incubators, our input, our process, and our output, eggs in one and poults out the other, it's just very important that each one of these requirements are made so that we can go from here to these poults that for a high quality poult, best hatchability, we'll find a lot of these. These are the requirements that are needed for this. I've got a little thing going on here that periodically as we go through, I want to emphasize things that it's called Tales from the Notebook. And these are things that when I come to your hatchery, I do a service visit. These are things that I find most common problems that are keeping you or holding you back from reaching your full potential as a hatchery. And one of the basic requirements that is very common, and you know, and I'm sure Henry, our other consultant, and Dr. Bramwell, this is one of the main things that we often find hatcheries lacking in is ventilation. And it's very difficult for us to provide you information to help you because we're just providing information to get around the ventilation problem, whether we don't have enough ventilation, whether we have too much, whether we have adjacent rooms that are affecting our ventilation. You know, you may need to, you know, just look back at our most recent webinar that we did on ventilation, where we talk about the things that are necessary and the effects it has within that cabinet and the airflow within that cabinet. But again, if you're taking notes today, this is one thing you need to just go back and periodically check is ventilation. If you're, and also a lot of times, the room controllers or the readouts of this equipment will say everything is okay, but when you get to looking, it's not. So it just needs to be cross-referenced and need to keep an eye on that to check that ventilation is proper in our rooms. So to achieve quality hatching, we're going to take a look at some of the egg setting considerations. Before we set our eggs, we just need to take the time and look at the logistics of what we have and what our egg pack's going to be. So the first is the breed type, whether it be Avian, Nicholas, hybrid, or BUTs. There's several breed types. So we need to consider this before we set the eggs and the effects it'll have on incubation, whether it be profiles or whatever. The other thing is the age of the flock. Do I have young flocks? Do I have prime flocks, old flocks? But the age of the flock determines up front how we're going to set those eggs and what time we're going to start our profile to start the incubation cycle. Age of eggs, another big thing, and I think this time of year, some of you experience some egg age right now, so we need to adjust our setting for the age of the eggs, whether they be 7-day-old, perfect, or if they're getting out there and getting older, then we may have to make adjustments for that. Partial setting. If we're going to set a partial set, then we need to know that up front, how we manage that set. And again, we'll be looking a little bit more in detail on partial setting. I'll show you some ideas that give us our best airflow in our mix within our cabinet. One thing that's becoming very common is mixed sets. That's when I say mixed sets, that's where you have your hybrid and Nicholas within one machine. How do we manage that? So to get the best and optimize the best out of that machine, and we'll take a look at that of how the airflow pattern is in the cabinet and some things we can do with that. Should we be doing the Spidey's treatment with the age of eggs? I know that BUT has done an article, Avian has done an article on the recent on Spidey's treatment with turkey eggs, and it does work. I wish that I would have known of this treatment when I was managing a hatchery, and I think it was first coming out. And one thing I think that the reason that turkey hatcheries haven't really caught on to the Spidey's treatment is just the logistics of trying to have the eggs there, let's say at 7 days or whenever you do the treatment, have the egg racks to do the treatment and have a machine available to do the treatment. So are the eggs in plastic that you can move into a machine or whatever? So logistically, I think it does, it will require some careful thinking to be able to do a Spidey's treatment within your turkey hatchery. But at the same time, I think the benefits that, at least from the Avian documents and the treatments we see in ducks and chickens, that this is a thing that will help us recover a lot of our hatch, especially with older eggs. The total incubation time. So again, all these things affect our total incubation time and when are we going to set our eggs and make our eggs set. And then we look at the profiles, what profile we use. And typically, we stick pretty much with one to two profiles, but I know different situations may have other profiles, and a lot of you have been able to take the time to adjust your profile and make adjustments within the profile. It looks like I've been, as I think Dr. Bramwell mentioned at the beginning, next week I'll be coming back on with more profiling, how we reached our profiles, and we'll be discussing it a little bit more in detail. I think a lot of you all would like to try some things with profiling. And I'll give you some ideas and how it affects the machines, the setups, different things like that affect it. So we'll be diving into that a little bit more in detail as we move along. But these are just egg setting considerations that we need to you know, be able to either have our egg room personnel take a look at this and know how to manage these eggs, or if we have time, just set some guidelines to follow to get these eggs set and to optimize our incubation. So I want to talk a little bit about egg traying and placing on racks. Probably a lot of this is redundancy to you. A lot of times I go to hatcheries and I see these things kind of get you know, overlooked, but one thing, we need to test the racks for ease of turning in the egg storage. We don't want to tray our eggs in a rack and move them into the incubator and then have a rack problem. So we want to make sure that the rack's going to work. And with the Platinum series, when the air line is pressurized, there should be no air leakage on the non-pressurized line on your rack. So need to check this in there, make sure the racks are turning. We also need to check with the eggs in place, but we need to, when we move our eggs back to our machines, we need to push the egg trays in all the way. A lot of them have worked forward by the time we get them, especially if we've got rough floors, drains we're going over. So we just check that the egg trays are properly positioned in the egg tray frames, and check for proper turn, ensure that all the egg flats are pushed toward the backs. And the egg flats, we really don't want them protruding. As you can see here, we can break some eggs, and if you're running 100 eggs, you know, to a rail here, to a tray, 25 egg flats, that's 1% hatch right there. So it doesn't take too much to add up when you have when these things are neglected, it can add up. And want to make sure that you know, we get these trays pushed in all the way so we can minimize egg breakage. You know, now we have some larger eggs, some molted eggs. Again, these are just some things that we want to check while we're placing these eggs and getting our racks ready to set. And so setting the P40 incubator, we have a guideline where we always say set our oldest on the outside and our youngest toward the middle, toward the ECU. And when we refer to this is not old eggs. This would be the oldest in lay, our older in lay flocks or our molted eggs. We would prefer these on the outside racks and working inward toward the youngest. The reason we do this is that as we go inward, the machine gets warmer, and the closer to the ECU, these 1, 2, 3, 4 racks are warmer than these outside racks. So younger eggs, younger in lay, a little bit more tolerant of heat if it becomes a problem. So that's why we try to balance the machine out this way. And then for the P60, again, we got it balanced like this, but I have another graphic I've added to this. And this is, the machine runs cooler on the outside and warmer toward the ECU. So in saying that, some customers, hatcheries, have found that if they got a poor fertility flock, but it's a larger flock, they'll put it toward the ECU and get the benefits of having, you know, of having more of an even hatch window of putting them in this location versus putting them, if you take infertile eggs, you're going to have less heat buildup, and to help heat those embryos, it's in a cooler location anyway. So again, there's opportunity there. I just kind of threw this out at you. You know, maybe this is something you need to look at. You know, if I want to place, you know, eggs in these locations. And the other thing is when we have our mixed sets, when we have breeds that are more tolerant to warmer temperatures and breeds that are more tolerant to cooler temperatures, we would try to put them on the outside and try to give ourselves a more even hatch window this way when we have to mix machines play. So these are just some things that you can think about and give you an opportunity there to optimize incubation. And when you take a look at putting your sets and your egg pack together, we look at partial setting. This would be with one empty rack. This would be a P40. We always want to go diagonally and go column by column when we can to balance out the airflow of this machine as much as we can. And this going diagonally and outside racks gives us our best airflow to do it this way. And here's the P60. This is with 4 empty racks. So we would put all of our racks on the outside. One thing, we don't put in any egg flats in these positions. These racks are, we hook them up, go ahead and let them be turning and go through the turning process. But we always want an empty rack in that outside position because if we don't, the air will just go right under this and go under these 6 and 8, these inward racks, and the air will be moved to those areas and not through our eggs where we need it. But when we have racks in these outside positions, it forces the air up and through the egg pack where we need our airflow. So we always want to do that. Again, no flats in these positions because they just typically get blowed up from the air movement and will cause us to have turn failures. Another partial setting, again, the outside column goes toward the outside and then empties. If we have a partial column, then we always keep the partial toward the top. And then we keep our full racks toward the ECU. And if possible, we avoid sets that are less than half the capacity of the machine. You know, I know I was a hatchery manager once. Sometimes that can't be done. And, you know, I do know the machine will hatch with just a few trays at all in it, but it may take a while to hatch like that. But, you know, that we can usually manage at least a machine if it's at least half the capacity. So this is some things to think about when we're doing our setting. Moving in to setting the eggs themselves before the set with the machine empty, we want to leave the incubator fans off and doors closed before loading eggs from the egg room. 2 hours before loading, we want to open the doors with dampers closed and allow to cool to room temperature. One of the things that we're basically trying to do here is I'll go into hatcheries and they'll go ahead and turn that incubator on and they want to try to get it down to an egg room temperature. And really, it's only going to get probably down to 70 degrees, an empty machine. It'll take a while to get there, but you're just going to end up with a lot of condensation from the cooling coils running so much. And it's really of no benefit to try to cool that machine. And it's better to maintain that egg temperature once the eggs are put in rather than try to cool them down. So have that machine cool. If you get your egg pack in there, if you're coming out of a 62, 65 degree egg room, it's going to hold that temperature for you until you want to start the incubation cycle. And we want to, you know, just make sure that we want to keep that incubator completely dry as possible. We like a minimum of 8 hours of holding mode before we start our profile. It's recommended to stabilize the egg temperature. We bring, you know, if you go into your egg room, you don't have the airflow within an egg room as you do inside that incubator. So you might have hot and cooler spots within that room. You probably don't have embryonic development in your egg room, but if you get it into the incubator, at that point, we can get all the eggs the same temperature, whether you're holding at 68, 72, 75 degrees, we bring all those eggs to the same temperature so that when we start the profile, all these eggs will be the same temp. And this will pay out in our hatching where we have a much tighter hatch window by getting all these embryos to start along near the same time. A minimum of 8 hours. I know being a former hatchery manager, you know, in a perfect world, Sometimes we don't get our eggs on time, or it's wintertime and can't get the eggs in for weather reasons or whatever reason we have. Sometimes this can't always be maintained, but this would give us optimize our best conditions for starting our machine off right. And sometimes it can be 8 hours the other way getting started, but once we get our eggs set, we want to verify the correct profile date, time, and person who made the set, just to make sure we get all of these things started correctly. And if there's no mechanical issues, we only open the doors for candling. Which is unique to turkeys, in that we do our candling, usually 7 to 10 days, and then we really don't open those doors again until transfer. It's very disruptive to that machine when a door is open, and it takes a while for that machine to come back to get to normal. It takes a couple hours. So we really want to limit as much as opening the machine. It's not like multi-stage machines where we have to go in a couple times a week, and whether we're setting eggs or transferring or whatever. So those are just a couple of things that we need to, again, we don't really want to open that cabinet door if we can help it, and lose our CO2 and disrupt our temperature. So tales from the notebook. I like to, a couple of things I see with setting is the partial setting. I'll go in and I'll just see, I've opened up a door and seen one rack of eggs sitting in the middle of one side of that machine, no empty racks around it. So again, this is not the best, and it's not going to optimize what you're doing. You want to, take a look at the graphics I give you for the partial setting, and make sure that we, get this machine optimized, even though we're setting partial, as much as we can, and get as good an airflow as we can. The other thing that I often see is wet machines. Before we ever get started, we got wet floors from condensation. We have wet floors, whether it's a quick turnaround, we just don't give that machine time to dry out. The ECUs may be full of water on the sides where it hasn't dried out properly. But again, these are some things that, I guarantee that if I visit certain hatcheries, we'll go in and we'll find this right off, and things that will affect our incubation. I want to move over a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about incubator profiles. Again, as I said, we will be discussing these a little bit more in length, and it'll be the complete industry next week. But today we'll just take a little bit. Here's an ACI, pretty common turkey profile that is being used. Here we have the developmental stage in turkey, pretty much up through 8 days. There is, the eggs are exothermic. They're taking in heat, and then once we enter the neutral stage, then we start cooling the machine down a little bit, and then into the exothermic when the embryos are putting off the most heat. Then at that time, we try to cool the machine down. Some of you platinum users will notice this profile is a lot warmer. I was kind of looking at this a little bit. It's almost like if you look at it, it'd be like a multi-stage profile, the way we set in a multi-stage, our crossbar temperature is 100.2, and then within our second rack, some of our temperatures we would expect to see, air temperatures, and then with a 98.2, 98.8 set point, then these are kind of some of the other temperatures. So I think the ACI kind of had a more even growth period throughout, whereas in the platinum, we have a little bit more warmer temperature at the beginning and cooler, which we'll take a look at in a minute. The damper opening, I think, was key to the ACI. At least it was. I know it was for me. I remember had my ACI machines, been struggling, hatching, had spread out hatches, just terrible hatches with it. And so one day, Leonard Price called me, and he said, I'm going to just upset your boat here, but he said, I want your fax number. I'm going to send you a profile. And he said, I guarantee it'll work and give you the best results. And this is what he sent, was this 0 damper opening up through 12 days. And sure enough, man, when we put that profile in, it really stabilized that machine. We took away some of our hot and cold spots, really got a balance. Then we could open up the machine, probably had CO2 build up, and it really made a big difference. And I think this was key to single stage incubation. We kept a very tight ambient temperature within the cabinet with that damper closed. When we get out to 13, 14 days, when the embryo starts requiring more oxygen, and we need the benefits of the damper being open to help cooling, then we see temperatures start to spread within the cabinet. But if we brought all these embryos along fairly constant up until 12, 13, 14 days, then we see a more of a even hatch and a better hatch window when we do that. Looking over here is our platinum profile. This was based off of a platinum pilot eggs. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. And this is our temperatures that we start out with. If you have some of the newer upgrades now, we have this pre-warm feature. It still takes away some of your the 25 steps that we're allowed within a profile, but it does allow you to put in pre-warming so you don't have to go into your actual day you start the incubation process. Single stage, we start counting at day 0, regardless whether the machine is up to temp. We hope that temp machine will be up to temp in at least 4 hours from the time it goes to from the standby setting up. But anyway, this is you can put these steps in now and not affect these and get into your time of your total incubation cycle. Multi-stage, the cycle starts when the eggs are pushed in the machine. That's when they start. That's when you start counting. And so that is the difference of the two. One thing you might notice in our new platinums is we started opening up the damper a little bit at the beginning. And we do this by lowering our CO2 set point at day 3 to 3,000, day 4 to 4,000. This just helps the damper feather, what we call just open and close just a little bit to try to bring some of the humidity down, because the cabinets are so tight now. We're offering that's a battle. We want to keep CO2 level high, but our humidity can get extreme when we keep that damper closed with this tight machine. So this is one of the things we do with our profiling, is to open that damper, let that damper start cracking open ever so slightly, and to just sort of relieve some of that moisture that can start collecting in the machine. Here we have a pilot profile, and to achieve our air profile, what we did is we put our pilots in the turkey machine, and this was our set point. Ran along, and the set point is eggshell temperature. So each pilot was measuring 12 eggs, 4 eggs each, and they measured at 3 different levels, and it took an average. And so this, what the eggshell temperature was here is what the air temperature needed to be here to maintain this. So at 4 days with a 101 degree shell temperature, the air temperature needed to maintain 100.2 degrees. And then as we maintaining a shell temperature 100.1, we start seeing 7 days, entering into the neutral stage of development. Then we start cooling. We see the machine cooling down to maintain this near 100 degree eggshell surface temperature on this machine. And then by the time we get into the exothermic and end up, we were down around 97.4, 97.6. And we'll see, you know, some of the strains of birds we put this on will be, have a little bit different, but typically, you know, when you're using pilots, most hatcheries, you know, will just run it a couple of times a year or 2 or 3 times just to see if their profiles are staying pretty well online, because they it's amazing how consistent they run. Every time you run a set through, these temperatures will be within 1 or 2 tenths once you get that initial air temperature profile going. And here is just a graph of the pilot results showing the eggshell temperature here that, as I was referring to here, of the, to maintain eggshell temperature of about 100 degrees, here you can see the air temperature required to maintain that. And then when we got down to 22 days, we kind of, we went up a little bit to help the machine cool if needed, and just ramped up the eggshell a little bit toward the end. Turkeys seemed to like that little bit extra heat. Not overheating, but a little heat at the end, and so we ran it up a little here. So anyway, we see that in our graph and the results. And so you know, I guess in saying that, you know, when we set you up with a profile, it's not the temperature profile is just not a guess. Something we have to wait, see if it works. 28 days later, is it going to work? These have been tried and tested, and these work very well. And you know, when we did do this, some of our setups also came to light. One of them was the turn setup. We come to find out that you know, stopping at 19 days, but if we stopped in the stop left position, we were able to balance that top to bottom temperature quite a bit. It made our top temperature a little warmer and our bottom temperature a little cooler, which we know the machine starts having higher temperature gradients as we get toward incubation. So again, the turkeys were really where we found this out first. Of course, this has been applied to the other chickens and ducks now that we know that this benefits having in this stop left position will give us our best airflow. Jerry Garrison, me and him went to work with turkey machines, and we just put pilots in when we were able to test a lot. And one thing we found out is you never want to level these eggs in a machine. That really gets hot. There's no airflow. The air just does not, the flow just does not pick up the heat off the egg or remove that heat when we're in that position. But in this position here, I think the air is forced through those eggs. It has to travel through those eggs. So we're able to lift that heat off, especially after we get out to 19, 20 days of incubation. Another setup, our humidity setup, you know, we now say if we can run a 45-degree humidity room, it's not necessary to even run machine humidity. I feel like that those nozzles spraying creates significant microclimates within the machine. We get a lot of evaporative cooling off of the humidity spray. Again, if we can keep the room, the air available of that machine 40 to 50% humidity, then we don't even need this. But if you are going to run humidity, we would probably want to do it after 14 days. If you're doing candling and you have your humidity connected, this can interfere. The humidity will come on while the machine is coming up, and if you open up those tracks, they'll just be full of water, get water running out on the floor, things like that. The dehumidifier feature on the humidity setup is no longer used. We used to have that feature, but when a dehumidifier came on, it caused some microclimate issues. Again, the auto damper was something that was used in the ACI, and so it's not used, and it controls humidity. And then, of course, you got your test spray to test your nozzles to make sure they're spraying well. So this feature here, you just, with the machine on, you can press that and then test, make sure your nozzles, if you're using them, do come on well. This is our CO2 setup. Of course, our span gas, if you're using gas to calibrate, should be 5,000 parts per million. We have a high CO2 level. Looking back on the profile, we have a 9,000 parts per million set point. So, you know, some of the eggs are, it just amazes me the fertility that we get out of turkeys these days. You know, even late and lay, getting out to 20 weeks, still seeing 92% fertilities at some locations I visit. It's just mind boggling. You know, when we used to, you know, if we got 93 or 92% fertility, we thought we were doing good. So again, machine can overreact and we can get some high CO2 alarms. So that's why we set this at 10,000. The minimum damper on a CO2 setup is at, so this is set up, our safety day we call is at 14 days. And what a safety day is that the damper, regardless of our CO2 set point, is going to open up at 15% day 14. So this is reading off the profile in the day and cycle, and that damper is going to go to 15% regardless. That is the time we start opening up our damper anyway. The machine might get a little bit ahead. You might lose all your CO2. It's not being maintained. You may ask why. Well, this is why, because you've got your minimum damper set this. So that the machine does start opening up and the embryos start getting oxygen. The hysteresis, this is just a big name. All it means is that if our set point goes above 100 parts per million, the damper is going to react. If it falls below 100 parts per million, it's going to start closing. So let's say you got a set point of 4,000, the machine builds up to 4,100. So if it got up to 4,100, the damper is going to start opening because it's 100 parts per million over. And the same if it's, say, 3,900, then it would start to close the damper up. And the damper duty, this is the amount of time that the damper works in a time period. So let's say for 5 minutes, it's only going to work 10% of the time. And this is so that the damper, if you just had the damper working at 100% of the time, it would just sit there and start opening and closing, opening and closing. So this just gives it time to react very slowly and to move along and keep that damper very stable as it moves along. Wow, I did not realize time was getting away from me here a little bit. Here is our fan setup. This is based off the Delta drive using pilot eggs. We start out 30% holding mode. I'm sorry, that should be 40%. I should have took a closer look at that. But usually we hold eggs at 40. The first day we go to 90%. We move as much air as we can surrounding those eggs. And then again, based on Delta drive, we'll run 60% day 1 through 7. And then as the gradients within the cabinet from top to bottom start to increase, our fans increase to try to do a better job of mixing that air. Tales from the notebook, profile setups. One thing I often see when I go into hatcheries is that the profiles changed, or I'll see like profile 5 and I'll go to 2 or 3 machines and profile 5 is different on all 3 or 4 machines that I look at. And so this causes some inconsistency, but it's something we need to follow. It needs to be checked periodically that our profiles isn't being changed. Do we need some additional password protection, you know, or different things like that. Sometimes management has to do a quick change to a profile to say it's overheating and the damper's only partially open, so they have to open up the damper or do things like that. So, but then it doesn't get changed back at the end of the day when the next set goes in. And the same with setup. So these are all things that that need to be looked at every time we make a set to make sure it's right. Of course, one of the most important procedures with the Platinum is, or any incubation equipment, is a calibration. We recommend temperature, humidity, and CO2, that these are checked for each incubation cycle. We want to do temperature within the first 24 hours or the following day. We come in, we want to adjust that, make sure it's running where it needs to be. And humidity, CO2, if you're using the gas, can be checked anytime, even during the cycle. And then the hatchers, they require once a month calibration checks. So these are some things that as we move along that we need to check. But the hatchers, they should be checked at least once a month. I know some of you do it every hatch. When I was a manager, I did every transfer. I did the calibration. So want to make sure we do that. If you're checking the fertility at 7 to 10 days, on a column, you can just do the outside 2 rows of a column, 40 eggs. That's going to give us roughly a 33% sample, which seems to be adequate for checking our fertility. We can also always cross-reference this back to our egg breakout. I always like to do that, and my hatchability on my breakout tray. I wanted to see how it compared to the hatch for that day, and also how the fertility, does that tray correspond with the fertility I'm checking? So just a couple of things that we need to do when we do this. Normally, hatcheries will pull out the inside row of eggs toward the ECU, and then they just manipulate other rows within the cabinet, other racks, to get their fertility, so they don't have to push all their eggs out into the floor. After they're done candling, they can push the eggs back in, and the machine recovers very quickly. One thing I do during the incubation process is monitoring machine behavior. You often have 2 incubators that are what I would call sister machines. They have similar eggs, but they were set the same day. And so what I'll do is I'll look and see what the machine behavior, how they're acting in relation to one another. And so with this, I noticed here, I got 2 machines. They're both 8 days, 7 hours of incubation. This one is built CO2 at 8,000. This one's running low. So when you notice things like this, you ask, why is this machine running low? Could the doors have just been opened? Did someone, were they candling? Did they have a machine problem? Or if there was nothing like that, then I would look and see at mechanical reasons. Is there a damper cracked open? Do I have a floor gasket missing that's really causing me to lose CO2 and things like that? So anyway, it's a good monitoring machine behavior, and it's one of the things that and tells from the notebook that I look at, that the machines are just not being predictable during incubation. So if one machine is not, then I want to ask myself why it's not. I'm going to keep moving along here. Dr. Bramwell, I guess if you need to stop it at any time, we can do that. But I apologize, just didn't realize that time was getting away from me. But we'll keep working along as long as we still have interest in this. So we're going to move to hatcher operating instructions. We want to start our hatchers 2 hours before transfer with baskets into machines. And we want to ensure the fans are on and our protective sensor covers are removed. This is to get our baskets up to temp. You can always transfer your profile start date from the incubator to the hatchers. And that way you don't have to write down the set date on a piece of paper and go stand in front of your hatchers and get the correct dates in. But you can use this transfer start feature. So you can just move the dates over. You select which hatchers from that incubator are getting the eggs moved into and which profile you want to use. And also take a look at how you want to, whether it's the right profile, whether it's been manipulated. This can also be done from Hatchcom. Hatchcom 4, you can move these over and do groups of machines at one time. Here's a hatcher profile with some of the setups. basically, you know, we start out at usually a little bit warmer temperature than where we're ending up. Our incubator, this kind of just helps with the shock of the eggs being exposed out in the transfer room. And then here I've kind of highlighted the red indicates where I would expect the humidity to start rising, and for the hatch to start, where it would peak. I have another setting here, and where it would finish off. And so this, when I look on my graph, this will show me a bell curve, and then I can see whenever that graph is overlaid with the actual humidity of that machine, I can see if I'm on time, if I'm behind, or if I'm in front of where I need to be. And you can adjust your profile to meet that need, to give your poults exactly what they need in the time of hatching. Let's say if you start seeing them hatch back here at 25 days, 8 hours, then it's really not going to see that and won't be making adjustments. So you could back this up so that it would create the best environment, and you don't have poults hatched out exposed to warmer temperatures or higher CO2 levels where they should be getting more oxygen down around this level. Again, we just some of our settings here. The minimum damper for a hatchery, you set at 25%, and starting at day 24. This CO2, we're going to take a look a little bit at the hatch sense profile on our next slide, but this, we usually run about 8,000 to 9,000 on the high CO2, and you'll see in a minute why. This is the hatch sense profile, and one thing I've noticed, as I said earlier, you know, with the pilots, you know, most people get them, they run them for a while, they're happy with the profile, and then they just run them periodically, or maybe one set a week or whatever. They're not ran from then on. But one thing I've seen with Hatch Sense, it has been very successful in the turkey industry for giving us a much better quality poult. And we'll take a look here at some of the reasons why. But this is what the Hatch Sense module looks like. It's looking at 4 trays. And what it's doing, it's looking for movement. And when it sees movement in 2 of these trays, then over here, it'll start this sequential stepping of the profile here, and it goes through these steps. Once it detects movement, it'll go to 96 degrees. So we've been humming along at 97.8. We're going to just all of a sudden, when it sees the movement, it's going to start cooling things down. And so what we're trying to do is get the earlier hatch to slow up. And looking here a little bit, you can see here from our humidity graph, this particular machine, this was our set point at 97.8, which you see over here. It saw movement at 25 days, 15 hours. Boom, this machine went through this, started these sequential steps, started counting at day 0, went to 96 degrees. So we're cooling the machine down. As you can also over here, as you see, we're opening up the damper and just really trying to make these embryos comfortable as we can without having them come on out. And for 8 hours, this machine ran at 96 degrees. And at the end of 8 hours, it went to the next step. And for 4 hours, it went up and it ran 98 degrees. And then at the end of that 4 hours, it dropped down to 97.7. So we held this 97.7 here is being held until it sees a drop in humidity. So as you see here, once the hatch is going along, it's going to look for what we call the hatch peak. And the hatch peak, the humidity has to drop here 2%. It has to rise 4% above our set point and fall 2%. And when it sees that the hatch is starting to peak and it's finishing up, the machine will start this next sequential step, starts at 0. So it went to 97 degrees here, For 2 hours, it went back up to 98 degrees, and we closed the damper for 2 hours, or took our CO2 up to 5,500 parts per million. And what we're trying to do here is get our late hatch to come out. Any late hatching that we're trying to get it to sync up with the bulk of our hatch. So we tried to delay early hatching, and we tried to take our late hatching and move it back into the proper hatch window and get as many of these out. So on this particular machine, the peak hatch was detected at 26 days, 17 and a half hours. So it just starts these sequential steps from here on, and it'll start cooling the machine down. You can see our humidity started finishing off, and bringing our temperature down, making these poults as comfortable as we can. So a couple of things here I want to mention about the hatch sense is, so it has a couple of safety features in it, and one is the timeout. So what happens if movement isn't detected? Say for whatever reason, we just didn't get, those eggs just didn't hatch or begin hatching on time. So what we have is a timeout. So with turkeys for this particular setup at 26 days, 3 hours, we're going to go to this first step regardless. If we haven't reached, if it hasn't detected any movement in this time period, we're going to jump right to this step in our profile regardless. And then the other is our timeout on our humidity. If it doesn't see a humidity peak, say you got a long draggy hatch or other things that are, you got washing going on in that room affecting our humidity drop, then this timeout feature will move this hatch sense profile right onto the next step. And then it'll just move through these sequential steps. It'll hold this here until it reaches, in this particular profile, 27 days, 4 hours. So it'll, at that time, it just starts going back into a regular profile. But we've been able to tighten this window up. And again, this is a been very successful in the turkey industry. And I suggest you take a look at it and see if it's something that you would be interested in, because it really, I think personally, I think right here is what we're doing. I think we're saving all this early hatching. We're slowing it down, and we're helping those poults be a better poult here when we take them off. So that's my personal feeling. I think that's where it's all happening. But there is, again, a lot of opportunity with this hatch sense and to help with your quality there. When we transfer, it's very important that our rack location goes into the right hatcher. So if we have a P40 with two P20 incubators, or excuse me, a P40 incubator going into two P20 hatchers, this is how the configuration we would want it to fall into. We'd want the inside racks to end up in one machine and want our outside racks to go into the other machine. This is because the way the timing, the hatch, these will just be a much tighter hatcher window, and you'll usually, these will hatch first, you'll take them out to be serviced, and then the next machine will come out next. You'll pull next. But anyway, just to keep these hatch window tights and to help with our poult quality. P60, we would take, going into two P30s, we would try to get all of our inside racks and two of our middle racks into one compartment, and then the same for the other machine. These would normally be pulled first, and then these would be pulled second. So that's one thing I see a lot of times, that the staging, we can balance these poults out as they are pulled. For the egg transfer, we just basically start at the top, work down the right-hand column, move downwards, remove all the trays from the right-hand column before proceeding to the left. So this stack here, this top tray becomes the bottom tray here, and then moving upward that way. If you are multi-stage transferring into a single stage or a platinum machine, we do it a little differently. We go a top tray and then a bottom tray and reverse it in an order like that to get the trays positioned to where they'll get the most benefit and optimize our hatcher. They're stacked, so the left stack contain all the eggs from the left column, and that's the way we would, when we do our egg transfer. Here's a list, a reminder list for eggs transfer. I'm not going to go through this list for the sake of time. Again, I apologize for running over, but I hope you all are can see that you're as interested and as excited about hatching turkeys as I am. Anyway, you know, some of the things that I see is want to level our racks when we're going from our incubator room back to the hatch room. We can lose eggs, but just some of the things here that you'll have on the presentation you can review. But I will mention two of the top things that I see in Tales from the Notebook is during transfer is removing racks. Sometimes I'll see, I'll go in and the employees have moved all the racks from one side of the incubator and taken them back to be transferred. And it's really created an imbalance within the incubator airflow while you have all that side out, even though it may be 30 minutes, 45 minutes, it's going to affect those left in there, and we're just not going to get the best air. So want to make sure we transfer correctly, inside racks out first, then our middle racks, and then our outside racks. Another thing I see is wet baskets. I know a lot of times we have to do a quick turnaround, but you know, whenever you call a consultant in for your black navels and your buttons, you know, this is probably one of the first things that we'll find is that the baskets are just wet. They're not being dried out properly. So is it something, you know, we need to do, get extra blower in there or something to try to dry these baskets out before we transfer. Another thing I see employees doing is not latching the doors. So like they go in, they take out an incubator rack to take it back to be transferred. They close the door, but they don't latch it. And again, we're just introducing outside hallway air, affecting that machine. And the same for the hatcher. They just opened up the door, they pushed in a basket. Yeah, I'm going to be back in 5-10 minutes with another stack of baskets. But what they do is they leave the door cracked, and we can get some high temps. Just takes it's something that I often find in my visits that is not being optimized. We take off the hatch, we turn on the alarm bypass, turn our fans off, open the doors, remove all the dollies with baskets of poults. So first thing, just going to open it up, remove it all, get all that machine emptied out together. Then we will, after the hatch is empty, we close the doors and we'll set our damper to 0%. We don't want that empty hatcher to affect another hatcher that is full of poults, affecting our plenum, affecting the needs of that hatcher, because this one is open 100% and there's nothing in it, and we're losing all of our room pressure, ventilation going out this one machine. Want to remove the lid from one column and just start down all the way. I know some of you go side to side. I think that's fine, but if you do start seeing some heavy panning as you get down toward the bottom, you probably ought to do it this method just to help even out that heat a little bit, and so they don't get too hot. But we want to destack that column before going on to the next. Just briefly, washing and cleaning. Want to wash and sanitize the incubator after every transfer. That is the beauty of single stage incubation. Of course, the hatcher after the pull. Want to protect our humidity and carbon dioxide sensors with the covers provided. So want to get those things so they don't get sprayed with water or disinfectant. Want to lift the ECU fan motors into the vertical position so they can be reached at for cleaning. Open the skirts on the ECU, and using a power hose thoroughly wash the entire machine, ECU, frame, and coils. But one thing we don't want to do is use a high pressure washer on the motors. You know, I get a lot of motor failure, and a lot of times it's just that we're using a volatile disinfectant or cleaner on it, and then on top of that we use high pressure, so it can cause our motors to for bearings to start screaming, and also premature failure of those motors. So we'll apply our disinfectant solution, and excuse me, I want to allow the machine to dry completely before reloading. So want to get it dried out, put it on dry out, have just a warning icon down here. Want to disconnect the machine from electrical supply before commencing clean out. As you know, water and electricity don't get along. Want to turn off the power. And again, down here, a note to wipe down and clean your ECU motors and fan blades by hand only, instead of using a power washer. I think domestic water would probably be fine on your motors, but again, we just don't want to hit those with a power washer, as it will cause some premature failure with that. So a couple of things in Tales from the Notebook I often see is the sensors are not covered, and I see motors and fan blades are hit with high pressure, and the other is displays getting wet. Just somebody spraying off the outside of a door, not paying attention where that water is going across and hitting a display on the other side of the room. So again, these are things that can affect it, that machine when you're cleaning, and cause things to fail prematurely. So Tales from the Notepad, little things make the big difference. Everyone is well prepared in the big things, but only the winners perfect the little things. It's by the Coach Bear Bryant thing he said, and things that I noticed, successful hatcheries do the little things. So these are the little things add up, and Tales from the Notepad, hatcheries that do these little things are often the ones that are the ones that are the most successful and get poults looking like this. These are just some good quality poults, bright yellow. They didn't have any treatment to get that color. So again, it's been my pleasure to bring this presentation to you, and I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Bramwell. I'm going to stop sharing, and well, you didn't come on, Dr. Bramwell, and stop me, so I guess I was. We had quite a few participants hanging in there.
Because we like you sharing. You said you're going to stop sharing. We like you sharing. It was good information. Yeah, thank you very much. That was very good. A lot of good stuff there. And we can tell that you're passionate about hatching turkeys. So that's just good. That's good. Okay, so we've got a few questions. There's a couple questions in here that are pretty specific that we'll probably have Phillip answer directly, because it'd be kind of hard to do it verbally, I think. But some things that kind of general things. What are the problems with setting fresh eggs?
Well, if they're too fresh, it does can affect our hatchability a little bit if they're too fresh. But that would probably be turkeys like at least 3 or 4 days seems like, okay, before they should be set. So I think it's just that normally what I see fresh eggs, it's just the hatch will be draggy. So you just should allow for a little extra time.
Yeah. And we know that you do what you got to do. If you're sitting there needing eggs, you're going to send them, but preferably, so you say with turkeys, preferably about 3 to 4 days.
Yeah, at least.
To wait, okay. And otherwise, we get some early dead. What are some disadvantages of mixed settings? And I'm guessing what they're meaning by ages or egg storage or whatever.
Yeah, or if the mixed setting, if they're referring to breeds, the disadvantage of that is that the two of the breeds that I'm familiar with, one of them tends to go about 27 days, 12 hours. And the other breed likes 27 days, 16 to 18 hours. So on hatch day, we got a little bit longer window because of these two different breeds. And again, as you said, sometimes it's the hand we're dealt with, and we have to optimize the machine. I showed some cooler positions, warmer positions. You may be able to help balance that out a little bit, but that's a disadvantage. Again, if you have fertility issues, I think you could look at some of the diagrams and just, if that's what they've given you to set, then you just try to optimize that as well as you can to try to get them to hatch as evenly as possible.
Okay. A couple of questions about Spideys, and you talked about it a little bit in there, and I think covered it, but somebody's wanting to know, if you can you briefly say what Spideys treatment is, and then also, if somebody's using Spideys treatment, would they change their incubation profile if they're using Spideys treated eggs?
Okay, so Spideys treatment stands for short periods of incubation during egg storage, and very quickly, it's sort of mimicking what's happening in Mother Nature as the hen goes in and lays her clutch of eggs. You know, in the wild, wild turkeys will lay 14 eggs in a clutch. But every time she goes to lay an egg, before she starts setting on the eggs, she's warming up the eggs that's already been laid. So she lays an egg every day. You know, by the time she gets out to 14 days, that first egg has had a short period of being warm. And then it cools back down as she goes off the nest. So this is what Spideys is basically mimicking. And so what we found, and in the Avigen test that I referred to, is they went in for 14-day-old eggs. They went in at 7 days, took the eggs out of the egg room, placed them in an incubator, brought them up to a surface temperature of around 99 to 100 degrees, held them there for 4 hours to ensure internally they got warm. And then they took them back out, placed them in the egg room, cooled them back down to egg room temperatures. Then when they made their set out at 11 or 12 days, these eggs had become 12 to 14 days old eggs. They recovered up to 6 to 8% of hatch of these eggs. So basically, I guess I hope that answers the first question, and is what Spideys and how does the treatment work. And then the second question was the incubator profile itself that you would normally use for a full cycle. There wouldn't be any changes to it. You would still run that cycle. I think you can speed these eggs up a little bit by doing the Spideys treatment, but I think you would just run a normal profile with them.
I think that's typically what we see with the chicken as well. I mean, like you said, it may adjust the pull time a little bit, but you know, you're not talking about 3 to 4 hours at increased temperature, you know, very often. And how much is that? It's not really taking off 3 or 4 hours. So something you would watch. But the Spideys, again, just because summarize, Spideys is not necessarily something you would do to all your eggs. It's just if you've got long-term storage is where you would try and implement something like that.
Right.
Correct?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. Question here. Somebody said they use in their hatchery more humidity during the last days of incubation, specifically in the hatchers. But in your profile, you showed less humidity percentage towards the end. Why?
Well, I like to keep I like to do my incubation and in the hatching side of it as less artificial as I can. So my humidity is the humidity built up off the poults as they hatch, the embryos as they hatch. So I think it's just we get a much better, cleaner poult when we're not adding that artificial. The other thing about humidity in the machine can raise our heat index. And we think that it's creating a better environment for our poult. If you have heavy panning, when you bring it out, a lot of times you'll see that humidity was high and just created conditions that helped our poult quality at all. Actually, it hindered us a little bit. Okay. So that's basically the reason that I really don't even want to see my humidity come on if I can help it. I just want it to be all natural. Let the natural humidity take care of the poults.
And really, the benefits of that is in your poult quality.
Right.
controlling. That's why we've done it. Okay. What would there be any equipment adjustments somebody might do for high elevation incubation in turkeys?
I'm sure there would be, yes. And it's probably would be profile. I would run pilot eggs. And typically what I would see in the higher elevation with the oxygen supplement, if that is even necessary, is a cooler temperature. For whatever reason, that higher altitude, running a higher temperature or running one of our, I guess, our regular level hatchery, it would be very detrimental and cause some embryo mortality. It would be too hot. And that one thing that we have seen is that the profiles need to run much cooler. Now, what we did with chickens was that we found out we didn't have to supplement oxygen because we knew what our CO2 level was, having the CO2 sensor, and that adjusted the oxygen level within the cabinet. So it really benefited there. But yeah.
Okay, so now that you mentioned CO2, there was another question on the CO2. You know, you talked about it, keeping the dampers closed and let that CO2 concentration build and accumulate. And your reasoning was to narrow the hatch window. Why do you think this occurs is what they're asking.
I think indirect of us building CO2 is keeping our dampers closed. And as long as we keep our dampers closed, the more top to bottom, left to right, everything's going to be within 1/10 to 2/10 of a temperature within that cabinet. And so as it's closed, and that helps us keep all those temperatures even, have more of an even hatch window. Is probably one of the benefits of it. And then of course the CO2 breakdown of the eggshell, your pip lines will be higher, but the poult doesn't struggle to get out. The eggshell's been has almost like a chalky feel to it, to where that CO2 has broken it down. Again, it's very similar to Mother Nature. That's how we derived that CO2 was getting high levels when they checked underneath a hen, that they saw this, and so we were able to apply it to our incubation. Of course, Jamesway incubation, we're allowing the embryos to build the CO2. It's not artificial, and so
right.
Basically, I think indirectly, I think that's what we did, not really realizing what we were doing.
Okay. What about chick? In chicks, you want the weight loss 67, 69%. In other words, the yield of the chicks. So can you just comment a little bit on your weight, moisture loss, and then your yield in turkey poults as compared to chickens?
It's basically the same. I think some of the same, we see pretty much the same target value in any avian species I've been associated with. But for single stage incubation, you know, it's more like a 10 to 11%. I know some of you all are seeing, you know, getting down into 9%. But if we try to get a 12% weight loss in single stage incubation, it just always turns out disastrous. It just it creates long spread out hatches by trying to lose that moisture in single stage. So that's why you know, we look at that. I guess our poult yield is based on you know, typically what I always felt like, if you know, a 68, 69% yield, I had all my poults out. But if I was placing the same day, I would want a little bit lower yield. You know, I've talked to people that they like a 63% yield. They want their birds to have lost some moisture before they take them out to the farm. But if they have to travel great distances, next day placement, then you may want to pull them off a little bit greener, so to speak. But basically, it's the same as chickens.
Basically the same.
Yeah.
What, as far as quality control procedures in turkeys and chickens, as far as candling, crash skulls and stuff, what's the difference there? Do you have numbers that are different, or kind of the same values for quality control when you're looking at your candling and breakout and embryo loss and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it didn't always used to be that way, but the way I've seen the turkey industry lately, and I think a lot of that goes to fertility. The fertility we're getting now is just phenomenal. So I think that it's very similar in the results and comparisons. What we would expect in our total. When we're doing a breakout percentage, different things like that. Might be a little bit more for fertility, but overall, it's getting pretty close.
Okay. Somebody's having high early embryo mortality in the first day, essentially 16 to 24 hours of incubation. What would you suggest would be the possible cause of that?
Would you like to answer that? I'll go ahead.
Oh, I can, but you go ahead.
Well, you can follow up for me or correct me, I guess, if I'm wrong. A lot of times, first early mortality is done to egg handling. Either could be associated with farm storage, could be associated with your egg storage. From an incubator side, I would think that we've gotten either really overheated somehow, would have probably be the effect of that. Be a couple things that I would look at. Of course, we have precautions to alarm systems to prevent that, but a couple of things I would look at.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. You can copy on this a little bit, and maybe they've done this. This is, what is the best profile to use for a Jamesway multi-stage incubator when it is used as a single-stage incubator?
I'm thinking that I may have to get back to this customer.
Yeah. Okay.
But rule of thumb in multi-stage incubation and going with skip sets is something that I'm thinking of, is you always run your set point for the oldest eggs in incubation. So I'm thinking that if you look at the manual, there are guidelines for running that machine through at different set points based on as you first set your first eggs and you're taking them all the way through. So if you would set that egg together all together, then you could probably go off of that. Or again, I may just have to come back online and or answer that by email.
Yeah, and one of the things we always need to be concerned about is if you're trying to use a multi-stage incubator as a single stage, is you got to remember the multi-stage incubators were designed to handle a certain amount of heat that is being shared amongst the embryos.
Correct.
As far as the ventilation air movement. Well, if you also have a incubator now that is all the same, a multi-stage incubator, it's all the same age embryos, you have a period of time the machine is having to add a lot of heat, which it's not normally designed to do. And then the last part, a time when it's trying to pull heat, which that multi-stage is not necessarily designed to do as well. So there are some potential problems with doing that.
I would think that you'd probably have to run a minimum of a 30% capacity to even, to try to attempt to do it. But in saying that, we see things like this all the time. So,
yeah, like you said, we do what we do have to do sometimes, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So what would be a normal in turkeys? What would be a normal acceptable cull percent of the poults, coming out of the hatchery, but then also like your 7-day mortality? What would be something we'd consider normal in turkey poults?
Well, I think, we would like to see it, 1%, 1.5% in our cold room. I know, I start getting phone calls when we get over 3% anyway. So, that hatch sense really, that's one of the benefits we saw was in poult quality. First week mortality, probably, may need some help here. I know, we like to see that within 1 or 2% as well as we get out, in those, in that first week, to keep the monkey off the hatchery back. But it's, it always comes back to us that we've done something wrong. But with the servicing that we do now, it's not as traumatic, it's not as much bloodletting as we used to do. I think that, these are achievable results of, 1 to 2% that first week.
Yeah. And for turkeys, what's the recommended minimum age weight it's set? I mean, what would be normal, something that you did?
I was, gosh, I may need some help here. I'm thinking about 80 gram, maybe. Probably go. I think we had a cutoff on new flocks at about 72 to 75 gram, and then we averaged somewhere around 80 to 85, and then as you get into malted, that's the other thing that that just amazes me is the fertility that we are seeing in malted flocks now out that 9-10 weeks of age. We would have 3 or 4 weeks of good hatch and good fertility, and then it would just drop off. But some of the larger eggs are around 90, 92 grams, probably where we finish off. But that's probably typical of what we see
Okay.
in egg weights.
Somebody's having a lot of fourth week mortality. What are some things that you would immediately check?
Well, it's not the hatchery's fault. I would look on the farm.
Fourth week in the hatchers, the last week of incubation. It's the
Right.
farm's fault, right?
Yeah. But so what it was
No, fourth week in incubation, last week
well,
incubation mortality.
be heat. Yeah, it'd definitely be high heat. Would be my first place I would look at. Am I overheating? And then the second would probably be ventilation, or am I getting high CO2 levels in there that's asphyxiating? But probably for fourth week mortality, that is the two places.
And if it's fourth week in the farm, it is the farm's fault, correct?
Right. It should be, yeah.
Yeah. So can you comment on, there's been some talk about the early feeding they're doing in chickens and stuff. What about for turkeys in the hatcheries? What are your thoughts on that concept for turkey poults?
Well, we've always, some of these that have to travel 2 or 3 days, we've always tried to provide the grow gel or some sort of
during transport.
Yeah, pucks, nutrient supplements. But my understanding is, if you put them on feed and water, I think you have like a 12-hour period. They have to go back on it. They cannot, by that time, we've sort of, their gut has become, has real food in it now. So it's its yolk reserve is not as beneficial at this point once it starts getting the food in. So that's my thoughts on it. I just think that, it may be beneficial, but it had to be done, to where they can be put out.
Yeah, what we've seen, what we've seen in the early feeding with chickens, the same thing is it's not a natural mechanism for chickens or turkeys to hatch out of the egg under the hen, immediately start being fed and eating. I mean, that's not natural. They wait till they all hatch, and that yolk reserve is there for that. And if you present it to them, they're going to be curious enough and pick at it. But are they picking at it because they're hungry? Not necessarily. They're curious. They're picking at it. So, like I said, during transport, long transport, give them some food and water and stuff. But trying to do it in the hatchers, really haven't seen a benefit to that.
Right.
Somebody said their hatch is, if they're seeing their hatch either too fast or too slow, they're behind or advanced. Could adjusting the fan speed up or slow down the hatch window?
I don't think that would have as detrimental effect as temperature would. After we get out, as showed in the presentation, after 13, 14 days, we're starting to ramp that fan up anyway and getting on up to 100%. So, I don't think that would have any effect on it. I think I would be looking more at temperature.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. One more question. Talk about the peak of the egg pipping in the hatchers and the CO2 level. What would be the maximum CO2 level in the hatcher that you would want them to see in the hatchers? And what would you do about it if it got a little bit too high?
Well, with our looking with our hatch sense that we use. 7,500 parts per million scared the crap out of me the first time I did it. But then I saw it doesn't seem to affect them that much when they get that high. And in that earlier stage, but then after a peak hatch, then they start gasping, and then we have to supplement the oxygen then. And the way we control that, if CO2 gets high in your hatcher, is open up the dampers, either by you get a lower set point in CO2 to get it open, or go to a manual damper setting if you feel like it's overshooting.
And what would be the number, the CO2 level that you would start being concerned about in the hatcher?
Probably, yeah. I mean, if I held 8,000 out through 26 days, 6-7 hours, I would be trying to get that thing down to 4,000.
Okay, so 4,000 is where you're wanting to be, 4,000 or less, something like that.
And then, as the hatch finishes off, we drop it on down to 3,000, 2,800, and then just open the damper up 100%.
Yeah.
And just give those, let them dry out nice and get all that fresh air.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, there's a few more questions there. Some of them are very, very specific that I kind of look at, and I think Phillip could probably do a much better job answering directly in an email, because they kind of want some specific data and information. So we won't answer those on here, and I'll let Phillip take care of those at a later time. I think you'll get a little bit more out of it. But thank you all for participating with us today in the webinar. Phillip always does a great job, and he will be back with us next week as we talk about these profiles. And I think people in all incubating nanny ducks, turkeys, chickens could benefit from how we came about our profiles and how we can use them in our hatcheries. So again, thank you for joining us. You'll get a copy of this at the next day or two, a link to it, so you can watch it and share it with other people if you want. And thank you all, and we will hope to see you all again next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.